Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are actually going to dive into a bit of a linguistic mystery. We're going to look really closely at certain everyday words that act, well, exactly like invisible pointing fingers in our daily conversations. Without them, communication would literally break down. But as we're about to see, they also hold this hidden power to completely transform the meaning of a situation. To see why these words are so incredibly tricky, just imagine you're a detective. You find a mysterious note left at a scene, and it simply says, "Meet the writer this Monday lunchtime." Well, you've got a massive problem on your hands. Without knowing the exact moment that note was penned, the phrase "this Monday" could mean absolutely anything. Was it last week? Is it next week? 10 years ago? The word "this" is clearly pointing to a specific time, but the map it's pointing to is totally missing. Or think about a classic practical joke. Let's say someone snags a sign that says, "Reserved for the Vice Chancellor" from a fancy dining hall and drops it onto a messy chair in a student dorm, maybe resting right on top of a comic book. It's funny, right? The context changes, but the absolute meaning of the words stays exactly the same. But that joke totally falls flat if the sign just said, "This chair is reserved." Why? Because the word "this" absolutely requires you to know what the speaker is physically pointing at in that specific moment.
Section 1. Defining Deixis, the invisible pointers.
So, let's talk about the linguistic culprit here. Deixis. Sometimes referred to as indexicality, Deixis is basically the toolkit of linguistic resources we use to connect an expression to situational features, things like physical location or time. In simpler terms, these are words that pull a huge chunk of their meaning straight from the context of the conversation. In a vacuum, they are virtually meaningless. You have to know who is speaking, where they are, and when they're speaking to have any clue what they actually mean. Linguist Paul Chilton hits the nail on the head here. He explains that you can really think of deixis as a spatial metaphor. It's how we conceptualize the way the speaker and the hearer are physically, temporally, or even socially positioned in a discourse. Every single time we speak, we establish a center point, a kind of conversational ground zero, and we use dictic words to point outward from that center. Moving on to Section 2, the 5 pointers. Anchoring communication. Language actually gives us 5 distinct categories of these pointing words. First, we have person deixis, words like I, you, or he, which point right at the people in the conversation. Second is place deixis, using here, there, or this to locate things in physical space. Third, time deixis, now, then, tomorrow, which anchors the chat in time. Fourth is discourse deixis, like the former or the latter, and these actually point backward or forward to other parts of the text itself. And finally, social deixis. Terms like madam or your brace point to the relative social status between the speaker and the listener. Each one attaches our words to a totally different aspect of reality. But here's where it gets really fascinating, and honestly, kind of funny. Even the simplest person dialectics cause massive confusion if you strip away the context. Take an excerpt from Tom Stoppard's play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. The actors are discussing a plot, and one remarks, "The old man thinks he's in love with his daughter." But because they're relying on the third-person pronouns he and his, the characters completely lose track of who is who. Which he loves whose daughter? Without a clear reference point, these tiny words turn a basic sentence into a totally ambiguous puzzle. Section 3. Shared perspectives and assumptions. Now, scholar Toon A1 Van Dyke points out that deixis relies incredibly heavily on shared knowledge. Context is built directly on the intersection of the perspectives of the participants. So the more knowledge, experience, and physical space we share with someone, the more we can safely rely on these pragmatic shortcuts. If we're standing in the exact same room, looking at the exact same thing, I can literally just say, "Look at that." And you know exactly what I mean, because our perspectives intersect perfectly. And you can see a brilliant illustration of this by contrasting 2 phrases. Think about the everyday statement, "I am going home." In that context, home is a shared, personal space of comfort. But then, contrast that with the political slogan, "Yankees go home." Suddenly, the dialectic center has completely shifted. Home isn't a cozy space anymore. It's become a rigid, institutional, and spatial boundary meant to exclude. It's the exact same word, but the shared perspective and the pragmatic meaning have drastically changed. Section 4. Politics of pointing. Deixis in global politics. This is where things get really impactful on a macro level, because political actors are absolute masters at using these exact same linguistic markers to subtly draw boundaries. Leaders use deixis to establish a very clear in-group we versus an out-group them. They create spatial polarization. They manipulate our sense of dialectic distance, meaning they frame things close to us as proximity and safety, and things far away as distance and threat. And they use these pointing words to refer not just to physical locations, but to massive abstract institutions. To see this playing out in the real world, Paul Chilton's book, Analyzing Political Discourse, offers some purely linguistic analytical case studies of international texts from major figures right after September 11th. Specifically, he does a side-by-side linguistic breakdown of speeches from George W. Bush and statements from Osama bin Laden.
Impartially analyzing these texts strictly through the lens of linguistics reveals something pretty wild. Both leaders, despite their obvious historical and ideological differences, heavily relied on the exact same structural strategy: dictic polarization. They both structured their discourse around spatial axes to measure relative distance from their own specific we. They basically used language to construct a center of rightness and safety for their own group and pointed to the other as being distant, alien, and wrong. It's an incredibly powerful demonstration of how fundamental these spatial words are to global political persuasion.
And we definitely see this dual nature of spatial pointing in domestic politics, too. Van Dijk notes a really interesting example involving former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. When Blair addressed the House of Commons, he used the word here a lot. But this here functioned dually. He was physically pointing to the actual building they were standing in, sure, but simultaneously, he was pointing to the abstract historical institution of Parliament itself. One tiny word, here, carrying heavy layers of both physical and institutional meaning.
Section 5. Discourse Microscope. Critical Observation.
Chilton brings up a really crucial point about discourse analysis itself. He says it's kind of like a microscope. And just like in physics, it comes with its own uncertainty principle. As observers, we simply cannot exclude ourselves and our own didactic positions from our interpretations of language. When we analyze a text, we're doing it from our own here and now, with our own we and them. Our interpretations are always, for sure, influenced by where we ourselves are positioned in the world.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Deixis proves that language is literally never neutral. It's always anchored somewhere by someone. Next time you hear a political leader or a CEO or anyone say, "We must protect our way of life here," ask yourself two crucial questions. Who exactly are they including in that we, and where exactly is their here actually located? Because as we've seen, those tiny pointing words hold the keys to the entire message. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the context.